They told me I was too old to understand my own company. My daughter said it to my face. In a boardroom I built with a 4 SBA loan and 11 years of 16-hour days. Then the chairman asked one question, and the whole room forgot how to breathe. I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Walter Hensley. Everybody calls me Walt. I'm 67 years old. I founded Hensley Precision Tooling out of a rented machine shop on 6th Street Southwest in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, back in the spring of 1988. I always believed that if you built something with your own hands and gave it to your children with an open heart, they'd protect it the way you did. I was wrong about that. Not about my daughter's love for me. I want to be careful here, because that part isn't as simple as revenge stories like to make it sound. I was wrong about what happens to love when it gets crowded out by ambition, by a husband with expensive tastes, and by men in Chicago suits who smile at you right up until the moment they don't need you anymore. What happened in that boardroom on the second Tuesday of September is a moment I'll remember for the rest of my life, not because of what my daughter said, but because of what I did next, quietly, calmly, with a folder I'd kept in a safe deposit box at Farmers State Bank for 11 years. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what we built and what it cost. I grew up on a dairy farm outside Anamosa, Iowa, the second of 4 boys. My father lost that farm in 1981 to a bank that didn't care how hard he'd worked, only that the numbers didn't add up anymore. I was 22 years old, and I watched grown men cry over cattle prices. I told myself I would never again build anything that someone else could take away from me on a technicality I hadn't bothered to read. I want you to remember that. It matters later. I married my wife, Carol, in June of 1980. She passed in 2019, breast cancer, for years fighting it, and I still keep her reading glasses on the nightstand because I can't make myself put them in a drawer. We had one daughter, Renee, born in 1987, the same year I signed the lease on that machine shop. I used to joke that Renee and the company were twins, born 11 months apart, and for a long time that joke felt true in the best way. She grew up sweeping metal shavings off the shop floor for $1 an hour. She knew the sound of a CNC lathe running clean before she knew her multiplication tables. Hensley Precision Tooling makes precision machined components for agricultural equipment manufacturers, mostly hydraulic fittings and gearbox housings, the kind of parts nobody thinks about until a combine breaks down in a cornfield in August and a farmer needs it fixed by Thursday. By 2010, we had 94 employees, a 60,000-square-foot facility off Wright Brothers Boulevard near the Eastern Iowa Airport, and contracts with 3 of the largest AG equipment manufacturers in the Midwest. I built that. Me, and a woman named Diane Ostrander, who I hired in 1994 as a bookkeeper and who by 2015 was running our entire finance department with a precision that made our auditors nervous in the best possible way. I'll come back to Diane. She matters more than anyone in this story, and she deserves to hear that. Renee got her MBA from the University of Iowa in 2012 and came straight into the business. I made her operations manager first, made her earn every promotion after that, the way my father never got to earn anything back. By 2019, the same year I buried Carol, I named Renee president of Hensley Precision Tooling. I kept the title of chairman and founder. I still came into the office 3 days a week. I still sat in on the meetings that mattered. I told myself I was easing into retirement the smart way, gradually, with my hand still on the wheel even if hers was doing the steering. 2 years ago, Renee married Derek Combs, a man 12 years her senior who'd spent his career in private equity out of Chicago before he decided Cedar Rapids and my daughter were both worth relocating for. I shook his hand at the wedding at the Cedar Rapids Country Club and told myself the same thing I'd told myself about Dale Dalton's handshake. No, wait, I don't know a Dale Dalton. Forget that. That's not this story. I told myself, give the man a chance. Derek came onto our board 18 months ago as an outside director with, according to Renee, operational experience we desperately need. Within a year, he was our chief operating officer. I didn't fight it as hard as I should have. I want to be honest about that, because people ask why I didn't see it sooner, and the truthful answer is that I didn't want to see it. Seeing it would have meant admitting my daughter had stopped needing me the way I needed her to need me. I didn't know it yet, but Derek Combs had brought more to Cedar Rapids than operational experience. He'd brought a relationship with a private equity firm out of Chicago called Cascade Ridge Partners, and a plan that had been forming for months before I ever heard the name. The first sign came in March. Small thing. I walked into what used to be my Tuesday morning production meeting and found it had been moved to Monday, and nobody had told me. Diane told me later she'd asked Renee's assistant why, and been told it was just easier for Derek's calendar. I let it go. A man doesn't want to be the founder who counts calendar slights like a man keeping score in a marriage that's already over. I told myself that too. By May, I noticed I wasn't getting copied on vendor contract renewals over $200,000. By June, our head of manufacturing, a good man named Curtis Yoder, who'd been with me since 1997, mentioned almost in passing that corporate had asked him to start reporting utilization numbers directly to Derek instead of through the usual chain. Curtis said it carefully, watching my face. I told him that sounded fine, streamlining, modern management. Inside, something in my gut had started making a low, steady sound I recognized. My father used to get that same look on his face in the last year before the bank took the farm, right around the time he started avoiding the mail. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere in a conference room on the 31st floor of a building on Wacker Drive in Chicago, 3 men from Cascade Ridge Partners were already drawing up a term sheet with my company's name at the top of it. It was Diane who brought me the first real piece of it, on a Thursday afternoon in late July, in the parking lot of a Hy-Vee on Blair's Ferry Road, because she said she didn't trust the office anymore. And when Diane Ostrander tells you she doesn't trust something, you listen. She'd been with the company 30 years. She'd never once, not one time, come to me outside of work hours with a business concern. Walt, she said, sitting in the passenger seat of my truck with a manila folder pressed flat against her knees like she was afraid it might blow away. I need you to look at something, and I need you to promise me you won't tell Renee where it came from. Not yet. I told her I'd never do that to her. 30 years earns a man's word, and I meant it. She opened the folder. 6 wire transfers, going back 14 months, totaling $340,000, routed out of a discretionary operating account to an entity called Meridian Bridge Holdings LLC, registered in Delaware. Diane had traced the registered agent. Meridian Bridge Holdings LLC shared a mailing address with a law firm in Chicago that, according to public filings, also represented Cascade Ridge Partners on 3 prior acquisitions in the agricultural manufacturing sector. I flagged it as a consulting expense the first time, Diane said. Derek told me it was strategic advisory work related to a potential expansion. I let it go because it was categorized right and it was under the board's approval threshold. But it kept happening, Walt. Every 2 months, like a retainer. And last week I saw the actual invoice for the first time. It's not consulting. It's a due diligence retainer for a sell-side transaction. I sat there in that Hy-Vee parking lot for a long moment, watching a woman load groceries into a minivan, feeling something I hadn't felt since the week Carol's oncologist used the word metastatic for the first time. Not rage yet, just the floor tilting. They're selling the company, I said. It wasn't a question. I think they're trying to, Diane said. And Walt, I don't think they think you can stop them. I didn't know it yet, but she was half right. And that half was about to become the most important half in this whole story. I want to pause here, because this is the part where a lot of people would have gone straight to Renee's house that same night and demanded answers across her kitchen table. I've never been that kind of man. I built a manufacturing company by being the guy who checks the tolerance twice before he cuts the metal. I drove home, sat in Carol's old reading chair with her glasses on the side table, and I did the thing I always do when something threatens what I built. I made a list. The first name on it was Sam Kessler, a corporate attorney I'd used exactly once before, in 2003, when a supplier tried to breach a contract, and who I remembered as a man who read every line of a document twice before he'd let a client sign anything. His office was on 1st Avenue Southeast, 3rd floor, above a coffee shop that had changed names 4 times since I'd last been there. I called him the next morning. Walt Hensley, he said when I sat down across from his desk. It's been a while. What's going on? I think my daughter and my son-in-law are trying to sell my company out from under me, I said. And I need you to tell me if they can. Sam Kessler didn't ask me if I was sure. He asked me one question, the same question I would hear again 3 weeks later in a much larger room. And it's the question that this whole story turns on. Walt, he said, what class of shares do you personally hold? And when's the last time you looked at the original capitalization documents from 1988? I told him I honestly wasn't sure. I told him Renee's corporate counsel had handled a restructuring back in 2015 when we converted from an S-corp to reorganize for a bank refinancing, and that I'd sign whatever they'd put in front of me because I trusted the people who put it in front of me. Sam's face did something careful and controlled, the face of a man who has seen this particular mistake ruin a lot of good men. I need copies of everything, he said. Every filing since 1988. Today if you can get them. I called the Iowa Secretary of State's business filing office that same afternoon. I drove to Farmers State Bank on First Avenue and pulled the contents of a safe deposit box I hadn't opened in 11 years, a box that still had my father's pocket watch in it, and underneath that, a manila envelope with the original 1988 Articles of Incorporation and every amendment filed since. I brought it all to Sam Kessler's office and watched him spread 37 years of paperwork across his conference table like a man laying out a crime scene. It took him 4 days. 4 days where I went into the office and smiled at Renee and told her the production numbers looked strong for the quarter. 4 days of sitting through a Monday meeting I'd once run and now merely attended. 4 days of watching Derek Combs lean back in his chair with the specific comfort of a man who believes he already owns the room. I didn't know it yet, but Derek and Renee had already scheduled a special board meeting for September 9th. The agenda item, buried on page 3 under routine business, read, Resolution regarding governance modernization and share class consolidation. Sam called me on a Wednesday evening. Walt, he said, and I could hear something in his voice, careful excitement held down tight. The voice of a lawyer who's found something and doesn't want to celebrate too early. Come in tomorrow morning. Sit down when you get here. I want to be honest with you about what I felt driving to his office that next morning. I was afraid, not of losing money. I'd built enough of a life outside the company that money wasn't the fear. I was afraid of confirming what I already half knew, which was that the two people I trusted most in this world, my daughter and the man she'd married, had decided I was an obstacle instead of a father. Sam had 2 documents on the table when I sat down. The first was the 1988 Articles of Incorporation. The second was the 2015 restructuring agreement Renee's corporate counsel had prepared. Here's what I found, Sam said. In 1988, you created 2 classes of stock. Common shares, which is what everybody else has ever held. Renee, Diane's small allocation from an old profit-sharing plan, and eventually Derek's board grant. And Class A voting shares, 5,100 of them, which you created specifically as a control mechanism. Back when you told me your father lost his farm to a bank that changed the terms out from under him. You wanted a permanent, undilutable safeguard. You wanted control that couldn't be voted or diluted away no matter how the rest of the cap table changed. I remember creating that, I said slowly. I don't remember why it mattered anymore. It mattered, Sam said, because in the 2015 restructuring, Renee's counsel drafted an amendment converting all shares to a single class, common stock. 1 vote each. It's sitting right here in the paperwork, ready to be executed. He turned the page toward me. There was a signature line at the bottom. My signature line. Blank. You never signed it, Walt, Sam said quietly. I don't know if you forgot, or if you got busy, or if some part of you didn't trust it. But the amendment was never executed. Never filed with the Secretary of State. Legally, on paper, right now, today, you still hold 5,100 Class A voting shares out of a total voting pool of 10,000. You hold 51% of the vote in this company, Walt. You've held it this whole time. And I don't think your daughter knows it. I sat in that office for a long time without saying anything. I thought about a version of me in 2015, tired, grieving a wife who was newly diagnosed, signing whatever stack of papers got put in front of him because his daughter's lawyer told him it was routine. I thought about how close I'd come, without ever knowing it, to losing the one piece of leverage that would end up mattering more than anything else I owned. They don't know, I said. I don't believe they do, Sam said. Which means whatever they're planning for September 9th, they're planning it believing they already have the votes to push it through without you. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find out exactly what they were planning, and it was worse and better organized and colder than anything I'd let myself imagine sitting in that Hy-Vee parking lot with Diane 3 weeks earlier. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge Stories. If you're just joining us, grab something to drink, get comfortable, because this story is about to turn a corner most people don't see coming. Before we go further, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. And if this story is already getting under your skin the way it got under mine telling it, hit that like button. Now, back to Cedar Rapids, back to that boardroom, and back to a special meeting scheduled for September 9th that my own daughter never expected me to walk into fully informed. Sam Kessler spent the next 2 weeks building a file, and Diane Ostrander spent those same 2 weeks doing something that took more courage than almost anything I've ever watched a person do. She kept working directly under Derek Combs, kept smiling in meetings, kept quietly forwarding documents to a personal email account she'd set up specifically for this, all while knowing that if they found out, her 30-year career would end in a walk to the parking lot escorted by a security guard who used to call her Miss Diane. What we found, over those 2 weeks, was this. Cascade Ridge Partners had offered $38 million for Hensley Precision Tooling, structured as an asset purchase that would fold our operations into a portfolio company they already owned in Waterloo. The offer included a management retention package. Renee would stay on as a nominal president for 18 months at a salary of $310,000, with a change of control bonus of $2.1 million triggered on closing. Derek, structured cleverly as a separate consulting agreement to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest, would receive $1.4 million as a transaction advisory fee, the very fee Diane had been tracking as Meridian Bridge Holdings LLC for over a year. The deal, if it closed, would eliminate our Cedar Rapids manufacturing floor entirely within 24 months, consolidating production into Cascade Ridge's existing Waterloo facility, and would terminate all 94 Cedar Rapids jobs, including Diane's, including Curtis Yoder's, including men and women who'd been on that floor since before Renee was old enough to sweep it. I sat with that number for a long time. 94 families. My father lost one farm to a bank he trusted. My daughter was about to sell 94 families' livelihoods to a private equity fund in Chicago and pocket $2.1 million for doing it, and she believed, as far as I could tell, that she had every legal right to do it because on paper, in the boardroom, she held the votes. She didn't know she didn't. The special board meeting agenda, which Diane forwarded me the moment it hit her inbox, contained one more item that told me everything I needed to know about how far this had already gone. Item 4. Resolution to reclassify founder emeritus Walter Hensley's board role to non-voting advisory status, effective immediately, citing the evolving governance needs of a growth stage transaction. They weren't just planning to sell my company without telling me the full truth. They were planning to formally strip whatever vote they believed I still had, that same morning, as a courtesy, before the real business began. I didn't know it yet, but the person who was going to make that motion, in front of the full board, was my daughter. Sam and I spent the days before September 9th preparing quietly. He drafted a formal written objection and a notice, required under our bylaws, that I intended to exercise my Class A voting rights at the meeting. We agreed not to send it in advance. Sam's exact words were, "Walt, the moment you tip your hand, they'll find a procedural way to delay the vote and lawyer up properly. You want them walking into that room certain they've already won. That's when the truth does the most damage." I thought about my father again, sitting across from a loan officer who'd already decided the outcome before my father opened his mouth. I understood, finally, on a bone-deep level, why I'd built that Class A structure back in 1988 in the first place. Some younger version of me had known this day might come, even if he never imagined it would be his own daughter standing across the table. The morning of September 9th was warm for Iowa, 74 degrees, clear sky, the kind of late summer morning that makes Cedar Rapids look like a postcard. I put on the same gray suit I'd worn to Carol's funeral because it was the only suit I owned that still fit right, and because some part of me wanted her with me that day, even if it was just fabric. The boardroom at Hensley Precision Tooling sits on the second floor of our headquarters on Wright Brothers Boulevard, glass walls looking out over the parking lot, and, past it, the runway lights of the Eastern Iowa Airport. I'd sat in that room for decades. I knew the exact spot on the conference table where the varnish had worn thin from 3 decades of forearms. 7 board members took their seats that morning. Renee at the head of the table, a position I had ceded to her willingly 3 years earlier. Derek to her right. Marcus Levinson, an outside director who joined 2 years ago on Derek's recommendation and who, Sam's research had shown, sat on the board of a firm that did legal work for Cascade Ridge Partners. 2 other outside directors, longtime friends of mine. Good men who I don't believe knew the full shape of what was happening. Diane, in her capacity as CFO, at the far end, taking notes with a steadiness that must have cost her everything that morning. And me, in my usual chair, second from the head, the chair I'd sat in since we built this room in 2004. Renee opened the meeting the way she always did, calm, organized, competent. I want to be fair to her here, because she is my daughter and she built real skills in this company, skills I taught her and skills she earned on her own. She moved through the first 3 agenda items with the crisp efficiency that had made me proud 100 times before. Then she reached item 4. The next item, she said, not quite meeting my eyes, is a proposed resolution regarding board governance as we move into this next chapter for the company. She glanced at Derek. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. Given the operational complexity of where we're headed, and out of respect for what my father built here, I'd like to propose reclassifying the founder emeritus board seat to a non-voting advisory role. This isn't about diminishing what he's given this company. It's about modernizing our governance for the transaction ahead. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet when everyone already knows the outcome and is simply waiting for the formality to finish. Marcus Levinson nodded along. One of my old friends on the board shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, saying nothing. And then Renee said the line. I want to tell you it surprised me, but by then I don't think anything could have. She looked at me, and there was something almost gentle in her voice, which somehow made it worse. Dad, I love you, she said, but old men shouldn't be the ones deciding the future of a company they're not in the room to build anymore. I need this board to move like it's 2025, not 1988. Nobody in that room breathed for a second. I sat there. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. Sam Kessler had told me, in his office 2 weeks earlier, that the man who reacts first in a room like this loses the room. So I sat very still, and I let the silence stretch a beat longer than was comfortable, and I let every person at that table watch me absorb it. Then Harold Voss spoke. Harold had been our outside chairman since 2016, a retired banker from Marion who I'd recruited specifically because he asked hard questions and didn't care whose feelings they bruised. Harold had known me for 30 years. Harold had also, unbeknownst to Renee, received a call from Sam Kessler 4 days earlier, informing him, as a matter of legal courtesy and board fiduciary obligation, exactly what documentation existed regarding the company's true capitalization structure. Harold folded his hands on the table and looked directly at Renee. Before we vote on anything today, he said, his voice even, unhurried, I have one question for the record. Walter, do you still hold your original Class A voting shares from 1988, and have they ever been formally converted or diluted? The entire room turned to look at me. I let the question sit for a moment. I thought about Carol's glasses on the nightstand. I thought about 94 families. I thought about a manila envelope in a safe deposit box that had outlasted a marriage, a diagnosis, and nearly outlasted my own attention. Then I opened the folder Sam had prepared for me, slid 2 documents across the table, and spoke for the first time since the meeting began. I still hold 5,100 Class A voting shares, I said, calm, level, the way I'd have quoted a tolerance spec on a machine part. 51% of the total voting pool of this company. The 2015 restructuring that would have converted them to common stock was drafted, but it was never signed by me, and it was never filed with the Iowa Secretary of State. I have the original filing and the unexecuted amendment right here, along with a letter from my attorney confirming both facts. Which means, Renee, that no resolution on today's agenda passes without my vote, including this one. I watched my daughter's face do something I will remember until the day I die. It wasn't anger first. It was arithmetic. I watched her run the numbers in real time, watched her realize that every plan built over the last 14 months rested on an assumption that had been wrong since before she was even president of this company. That's not possible, she said. Her voice had lost its boardroom polish. Corporate restructured everything in 2015. Everyone signed off. Everyone but me, I said. I never executed that document, Renee. I don't believe you knew that. I believe your counsel assumed it was filed because it was drafted and nobody checked. Derek Combs, to his credit or discredit, recovered faster than his wife. This is a procedural technicality, he said. We can address it after the vote, through counsel, and, Derek, I said, And this is the moment Sam had told me would matter most, the moment where tone would do more work than volume ever could. I know about Meridian Bridge Holdings. I know about the $340,000 in advisory fees routed through a Delaware entity that shares a mailing address with Cascade Ridge Partners outside counsel. I know about the $38 million offer for this company's assets. I know about your $1.4 million consulting fee, and I know about Renee's $2.1 million change of control bonus. And I know that this deal, as structured, eliminates every job on our manufacturing floor within 24 months of closing. I let that land. So no, I don't think we're going to be addressing anything after the vote. I think we're going to address it right now. Diane Ostrander, at the far end of the table, kept her eyes on her notepad, but I saw her hand, just for a second, press flat against the table like she needed it to stay steady. I didn't know it yet, but the next 90 seconds in that room were going to end my daughter's tenure as president of the company I built. And I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened, because people ask me this constantly, and I owe you the honest answer. I did not walk into that boardroom wanting to destroy my daughter. I walked in wanting to protect 94 families and a company that carried my father's stubbornness and my late wife's patience in every load-bearing beam of it. What happened to Renee happened because of choices she made, not because I wanted to make her pay for existing. Marcus Levinson tried to salvage the moment. He suggested a recess, time for everyone to review the documentation properly. I looked at Harold Voss. Harold, without raising his voice, said the recess motion would need a majority vote, and reminded the room, gently, that the majority now sat in my chair. I called the vote myself. I voted my 5,100 shares against the governance resolution stripping my board seat. It failed. I voted my shares against a motion Derek quickly tried to introduce to table the meeting entirely. That failed too. Then I did something Sam and I had discussed at length in his office on First Avenue. Something I want to be honest with you took real thought, because it wasn't only about punishing wrongdoing. It was about who I trusted to run what I'd built. I moved to remove Renee Hensley Combs as president of Hensley Precision Tooling, effective immediately, and to terminate the consulting engagement of Derek Combs, effective immediately, for undisclosed conflicts of interest and unauthorized use of corporate funds to advance a transaction never approved by the full board or its majority shareholder. Harold Voss seconded the motion. With my 51%, it carried on the spot. Renee sat frozen for a long moment. Then she said the only thing I think she had left. Dad, this is my life. This is everything I've built. No, I said, and my voice, I promise you, never rose above the volume I'd used discussing a shipment schedule. This is everything I built, and everything I gave you the chance to build on top of. You didn't lose it because you're a woman running a company, or because you're my daughter, or because you made one bad decision under pressure. You lost it because you and your husband spent 14 months planning to sell 94 people's jobs to a fund in Chicago, take $3.5 million between the two of you, and strip your own father's vote in the same meeting, believing he'd never notice because he trusted you enough not to check. I want to tell you the room erupted. It didn't. That's not how these rooms work, and it's not how real consequences land. Renee stood up slowly, gathered the folder in front of her, and left the room without another word. Derek followed a moment later, already on his phone, already, I imagine, calling whatever lawyer Cascade Ridge Partners kept on retainer. Marcus Levinson resigned from the board within the hour, by email, citing personal reasons, which everyone in that room understood perfectly well. I didn't know it yet, sitting in that boardroom with the airport runway lights blinking past the glass, but the hardest conversation of that entire day was still ahead of me, and it wasn't with Renee. It was with Diane Ostrander, 3 hours later, in my office, when I asked her to do something she never in 30 years expected to hear from me. We ended the meeting with Harold Voss appointed interim chairman of the operating committee and a resolution, unanimous among the remaining directors, formally terminating all discussions with Cascade Ridge Partners and instructing counsel to send written notice that Hensley Precision Tooling was not for sale, not now, not under any structure resembling the one that had been quietly negotiated behind the company's back. That afternoon, I called Curtis Yoder down to my office. The same Curtis who'd mentioned months earlier, carefully, watching my face, that reporting lines had shifted without explanation. I told him the sale was dead, the jobs were safe, and I wanted him to walk the floor personally the next morning and tell every one of our 94 employees exactly that, in his own words, because I knew they trusted him more than they'd ever trust a memo from corporate. Then I asked Diane to come in and close the door. She sat across from me the way she had for 30 years, back straight, hands folded, waiting. I want you to understand what this woman had risked. She'd spent 2 weeks quietly forwarding documents that could have ended her career and, frankly, could have exposed her to real legal risk if any of it had gone differently. She'd done it because 30 years earlier I'd given her a chance nobody else in Cedar Rapids would give a single mother with a bookkeeping certificate and no 4-year degree, and she'd never forgotten it, even when I nearly did. Diane, I said, I'm asking Harold to help me restructure the executive team over the next 60 days. I want you to take over as president of this company. She went very still. Walt, I'm a finance person. I've never run operations. You've been running the parts of this company that actually mattered for 15 years, I said. You just never had the title. I trust you with 5,100 shares worth of trust, Diane, and I don't say that lightly. I slid a second folder across the desk, one Sam had prepared without my daughter's knowledge over the previous week. It was a proposed grant of 2% of the company's common equity, vested over 4 years, along with a base salary increase that finally reflected what she'd actually been worth to this company since roughly 2008. This isn't charity, I said. This is overdue. Diane Ostrander, 30 years with this company, who had never once in 3 decades taken a sick day she didn't desperately need, sat in my office and cried, quietly, the way people cry when something lands on a wound they'd stopped expecting anyone to notice. I don't know what to say, Walt. Say you'll take the job, I said. I'll take the job, she said. I want to tell you the rest of this cleanly, because you've earned it after sitting with me through all of that. Renee did not go quietly into total estrangement, and I don't want you to think this story ends with a daughter cut off forever, because that's not entirely true, and it's not entirely false either. Under Iowa corporate law and the terms of her termination, Renee retained her common shares, worth a real but far smaller sum than the $2.1 million change of control bonus she'd have collected under the Cascade Ridge deal. She and Derek separated 4 months later. I heard through mutual friends that his consulting business in Chicago quietly dissolved once word got around certain circles about how the Hensley transaction had fallen apart, and about why. I don't take pleasure in that. I want to be honest about that too. Renee called me on a Sunday morning in November, almost exactly 2 months after that board meeting. I let it ring twice before I picked up, the way you do when you're deciding, in real time, whether you're ready. Dad, she said, and her voice had none of the boardroom in it. I've had a lot of time to think. I told her I had too. I don't know how to undo what I tried to do, she said. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just needed you to know I understand what it cost. All of it. The jobs. Diane. You. I told her I appreciated that, and I meant it. And I also told her, gently, the way I'd have told her as a girl standing at the edge of something she wasn't ready for, that understanding it was the beginning of something, not the end of it. We talk now some weeks. Not every week. She's working, currently, for a smaller manufacturer in Waterloo, in an operations role 2 levels below what she used to hold, learning, I hope, the parts of leadership that come from the floor up instead of the boardroom down. I don't know yet if we get all the way back to where we were. I've learned, at 67, that some things you rebuild slowly, on purpose, the same way you'd rebuild a machine you actually intend to keep running for another 30 years, and some things you let settle into whatever shape they're going to take, without forcing them. What I know for certain is this. 94 families in Cedar Rapids went to work the next Monday morning, and every Monday morning since, in jobs that still exist, because a piece of paper I forgot I signed 37 years ago turned out to matter more than anyone in that boardroom expected. Curtis Yoder still runs our manufacturing floor, and he still calls me Walt instead of Mr. Hensley, the way he has since 1997. Diane Ostrander has been president of Hensley Precision Tooling for going on a year now, and last month she brought in our best 4th quarter in company history, and I sat in the back of the room during her presentation to the board, not saying a word, just watching a woman finally get the credit that should have been hers a decade ago. I still keep that manila folder in the safe deposit box at Farmers State Bank, right next to my father's pocket watch. I go check on it sometimes, not because I think anyone's coming for it again, but because it reminds me of something I want to leave you with tonight. My father lost everything because he trusted a system he never fully read the fine print on. I almost lost everything for the exact same reason, 37 years later, in a company I built with my own two hands, because I trusted the people closest to me to protect what I couldn't be bothered to double-check. The lesson isn't that you can't trust your children. I still love my daughter, and some nights that love sits right alongside everything else I feel about what she tried to do. Uncomfortable, complicated, real. The lesson is that love and vigilance were never supposed to be opposites. You can hand someone the keys to everything you've built and still, quietly, keep one door that only you can open. Not because you expect betrayal. Because you understand, the way my father never got the chance to, that the people who love you and the systems that can still take everything from you are not always the same thing, and a wise man keeps both of those facts in view at the same time, for as long as he's able. I still drive past that building on Wright Brothers Boulevard some evenings, the way I used to drive Carol home from her treatments, slow, no particular hurry. The lights are always on late these days. Diane keeps them running a little longer than I ever did. Says the third shift works better when they know somebody upstairs is still paying attention. I think about that sometimes, a company that survived because somebody was still paying attention, and I think it's not a bad thing to be remembered for. If this story meant something to you tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button, leave a comment, and tell me where you're listening from, and subscribe to Sweet Family Revenge Stories so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you next time.